Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some more San Jose Sharks trade because, of course, the trade deadline of the 22-23 season has come and gone today, and in its wake, it has left us with three more San Jose Sharks trades, none at the level of the Timo Meier deal from a few days ago. Erik Karlsson is indeed still a San Jose Shark, but still three trades that are somewhat notable for sure. The first deal to talk about is actually more so a continuation from the deal a couple of days ago that saw the Sharks send Mikey Eyssimont to the Lightning in exchange for Vladislav Namestnikov. And finally, the other shoe drops here. The Sharks trade Namestnikov to the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for a fourth-round pick in 2025. Now, funnily enough, the Jets are the team the Sharks originally got Eyssimont from off of the waiver wire, and in the end, this trade technically ends up being Eyssimont for a fourth-round pick. The Jets end up with Namestnikov, but from a Sharks perspective, that is indeed the deal. And in my video talking about the Eyssimont trade, I said that this was a bad deal because the Sharks did not seemingly have something in place to get rid of Namestnikov. Now, luckily, they do end up getting back value anyway. But if I'm going to just solely look at this trade from an Eyssimont for a 2025 fourth-round pick, I don't think this deal is necessarily all that great. Now, some optimists, a glass half full type of person, will look at this deal and say, technically, the Sharks got a fourth round pick for free. If you take a look at the Sharks at the beginning of this year and then you take a look at them at the end of this year, you'll see an extra fourth round pick appear and technically no players having been lost because the Sharks got him for free off of the waiver wire. But that doesn't necessarily mean you just give him away. I thought Eyssimont played very, very well with the San Jose Sharks, and I believed that his value was at least somewhat higher than a fourth round pick. A third round pick, I would have accepted it and I would have said, you know what, farewell Eyssimont, you did very well. But as a fourth round pick, I think the Sharks could have just kept him on. He's not an unrestricted free agent. This isn't a trade that needed to happen. He is a restricted free agent who the Sharks could have retained the services of. And I think Eyssimont would have served this team rather well over the next couple of years, even if he's not some sort of future piece for the rebuild. In 3 years, he might not be a part of the San Jose Sharks organization. Is a fourth round pick so worth it that you're willing to part with a player who gives this team like a really strong culture to the dressing room because he plays a very much a Mike Greer sort of way. He's like kind of an enforcer, but actually good at hockey. He's not Yona Gadjevich, who's going to come in, put like 3 points up on the season and then randomly fight guys in many straight games, but he's going to be able to still get in players' faces, still be a nuisance on the ice, but actually contribute on the score sheet. If not for his awful finishing, Eyssimont actually would have had a hefty amount of points with the San Jose Sharks, more than he ended up with in the end, because he was generating a lot of great chances in the offensive zone. He kind of reminds me in a way of a Noah Gregor, but in a different sense. Gregor, a lot of his missed opportunities are coming off of odd man rushes that he generates with his speed when he's against weaker competition by being on that third or fourth line. Meanwhile, Mikey Eyssimont fails to convert on his chances, but the chances that he generates are from the forecheck, from working hard in the offensive zone, which are more consistent than those failed odd man rushes from Noah Gregor. So I really liked Eyssimont. I felt as though the Sharks definitely could have kept him if the return was just going to eventually end up being a fourth round pick, but I guess in the end, it's not all that bad. The other trade here is more of a minor league swap. This was that the Sharks traded Scott Reedy to the Dallas Stars in exchange for Jacob Peterson. Now, both of these players were in very, very similar situations with their respective teams and are essentially trying to be given a change of scenery type of situation. If we take a look at Scott Reedy, he played about 35 games for the Sharks last year and scored 7 goals during that time, primarily playing on the fourth line, which isn't all that bad. That's a pace of about 15 goals over a full season. And in the minors that year, he played 38 games, scored 27 points, including 18 goals. So it looked like he may be on his way to being a decent fourth line option for the San Jose Sharks. But this year, he took a step back, never got a single game with San Jose up with the main squad, and while playing with the Barracuda in the very same 38 games, only managed 13 points, which is less than half of what he had last year, and only 5 goals, which is less than a third of what he had last year. So indeed, he did seemingly stall. On the Dallas Stars side, that is Jacob Peterson. He played 65 games with the Dallas Stars last year, including 12 goals, which also would have put him on pace for about 15 in a full season. And in the 6 games that he played with the Texas Stars in the AHL, he managed 5 points. So he seemed like the type of player who was also going to take that step forward for the Stars this year. But again, that didn't happen. He's only played a single game in the NHL this year, didn't score a point or anything of that nature, and in the AHL he played 44 games and managed just 26 points, which is technically a better pace than Scott Reedy for sure, but it should be noted that the Texas Stars are one of the best teams in the AHL this year, while the Barracuda are one of the worst teams, so that may have inflated Jacob Peterson's point totals in the end. And so this is, like I said, essentially just a swap of my prospect who had a decent year last year, has stalled this year, so has yours. How about we swap them around and see if maybe both can accelerate forward in their career? So a decent deal, but nothing to write home about here. The final trade, and maybe the most notable one, was the one that saw the Sharks trade away Nick Bonino. This was quite obviously going to happen as long as there was some sort of market for him, similar to how the Sharks traded away Andrew Cogliano last year in exchange for a 5th-round pick from the Colorado Avalanche. However, the value gotten in this deal, not that amazing. There was a sort of player-for-player swap also involved here that I'm not really going to mention much, but I'll briefly mention here at the beginning. The Sharks gave up Tony Sund and got back Arvid Henriksen, but this just seems to be like logistics type of situation, and neither of these players are anything important, I would say. The actual trade that ends up happening is that the Sharks give up Nick Bonino in exchange for a 5th-round pick, a conditional 5th-round pick from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and a 7th-round pick. Now, the condition is that the Penguins, if they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, this 5th becomes a 4th-round pick, a similar condition to the conditional first from the New Jersey Devils trade, which was that if the Devils made it to the Eastern Conference Finals this year or next year, the 2nd becomes a 1st-round pick. But while the Devils could theoretically make that in the extended 2-year window, the Penguins, it's extremely unlikely, and so mostly this is going to be a 5th-round pick and a 7th-round pick. However, that's not entirely what the Sharks got, because they had to move through a 3rd team, the Montreal Canadiens here, so that they would retain half of Nick Bonino's contract, and for them to do that, the Sharks gave up a 5th-round pick of their own. So at the end of the day, the Sharks traded Nick Bonino essentially just for a 7th-round pick in 2023, which seemingly is rather low value. Now, you may be wondering why the Sharks didn't just retain the salary themselves on Nick Bonino's deal. Well, it is very important to mention a rule in the NHL, which is that teams can only retain the contracts of 3 players, and currently the Sharks are already retaining on Brent Burns for multiple seasons moving forward, as well as on Timo Meier. And so if they had retained on Nick Bonino, they would be at their max amount of contract values retained, which is not the end of the world, because of course both Nick Bonino and Timo Meier's contract run out at the end of this season, but that only flips on July 1st when contracts sort of move on, and only frees up those 2 slots then. But as we know, teams like to make deals at the NHL draft, and that comes about a week before free agency opens up. And so if Mike Grier has that sort of ambition to try and move on from a player like Barabanov, or potentially one of the bigger fish like Logan Couture or of course Erik Karlsson, he's going to need the flexibility of being able to retain some value on those contracts in trades. And so he basically gives up a 5th-round pick here to the Canadiens to retain that flexibility, which I actually think is a decent move. If Grier manages to make a trade happen at the NHL draft, we're going to completely forget about the 5th-round pick lost here, and if not a 5th-round pick, it's really not the end of the world. So at the end of the day, it is indeed a trade of Bonino for a 7th-round pick. If the market wasn't there, the market wasn't there. Maybe other NHL teams are seeing what we see in Nick Bonino, which is not the most effective player, but at least they got something for a player who is, an unrestricted free agent, almost certainly won't be coming back to the San Jose Sharks. So an okay deal, I guess. But that will do it for this look Finally, the trade deadline, it has passed. The Sharks made so many trades. Were clearly very much a seller here moving up to the deadline. They got rid of Meyer. They got rid of Bonino. Notably, the couple of players who the Sharks did not actually get to move on from, in particular James Reimer. So like I mentioned in my review of last night's game, his final game, or his seemingly final game as a San Jose Shark, if he was going to get moved, it would probably end up being for like future considerations because of the real downturn that he has had this season, but there seemingly was not even a market for that, and so Reimer will remain a San Jose Shark for the rest of the season. I'm sure there were also people potentially wondering if Barabanov would get traded, Carlson would get traded, LeBanc would get traded, but these players, they have multiple years left on their contract. It's difficult to make something happen, and like I said, Greer likely wanted to maintain the flexibility of having one of these slots open for the NHL draft in a couple of months, so nothing of that nature happened, but still some trades going on. Class dismissed.